Have you ever had a moment where your entire life suddenly made sense? Like a puzzle piece you didn't even know was missing just clicked into place. In the trans community, there's a term called getting your egg cracked. It refers to a moment someone realizes and accepts that they're trans, breaking through denial and stepping into self-understanding. I believe autistics and ADHDers have their own egg crack moment too. That moment when you finally realize, maybe for the first time, that your struggles, your quirks, your challenges, they aren't random, they aren't flaws, they aren't personal failings, they are part of how your brain works. And that realization, it changes everything. I'm Essie, an autistic and ADHD therapist, and today I want to talk to you about what it's like to go through this process, the confusion, the relief, the grief, and ultimately the liberation of knowing who you are. Before the egg cracks, life can feel like a constant uphill battle. You don't have a name for your struggles. You just know things are harder for you than they seem to be for everyone else. Maybe you always struggled with executive function, keeping track of time, organizing your thoughts, following through on plans. Maybe school felt overwhelming, not because you weren't smart, but because focusing and finishing assignments took 3 times the effort it seemed to take everyone else. Maybe social interactions were confusing. You kept saying the wrong thing, misreading people's reactions, or finding conversations exhausting. Or maybe it was sensory and motor differences, clothing textures, bright lights, loud sounds, certain foods, all things that other people seemed fine with, but sent your system into overload. Instead of understanding that these struggles were part of being neurodivergent, you were likely given other labels: lazy, difficult, selfish, rude, forgetful, disorganized, clueless. And when you hear those words enough, you start to believe them. Many neurodivergents, especially those diagnosed later in life, become experts in masking. You learn to study people to mimic what's considered normal. You suppress your stims. You force eye contact. You pretend you understand jokes when you don't. You push yourself to exhaustion, trying to keep up with a world that doesn't accommodate you. But masking comes at a pretty substantial cost. It leads to burnout, anxiety, depression, a deep exhaustion that seeps into every part of your life. And the worst part, you don't even realize it's happening because you've been doing it for so long that it feels normal. One of the hardest things about growing up undiagnosed isn't just the external struggles, it's what happens internally. When the world constantly tells you you're lazy, difficult, or not trying hard enough, those words don't just stay outside of you. Over time, they sink in. This is called internalized ableism. When we absorb the stigma and misconceptions society places on neurodivergent people and start applying them to ourselves. Instead of questioning why the world isn't accommodating us, we start to believe that we are the problem. And this belief doesn't just sit quietly in the background, it turns into a voice, a relentless, punishing, tyrannical inner critic. This internal voice doesn't encourage or guide you, it berates and belittles you. Instead of saying, this task is difficult, maybe I need a different approach, it says, why can't you just get it together? Instead of, that social interaction was tough, maybe they misunderstood me, it tells you, you're weird, you'll never fit in. Instead of, I need help with this, it says, you're pathetic for needing help at all. Over time, it wears away at self-esteem. You start believing, I'm not good enough. I'll always mess up. No one wants to deal with me. I have to prove my worth through perfection or by being useful. This inner voice doesn't let you celebrate successes. It moves the goalposts. Did you accomplish something? Well, it wasn't that impressive. Did you get a compliment? They were just being nice. Did you finally finish a project? You should have done it sooner. Self-doubt becomes second nature. You stop trusting your abilities, your instincts, and even your own experiences. Confidence isn't just about believing in yourself. It's about feeling safe to try, to fail, and to grow. And when your inner critic constantly attacks you, every step forward feels like a risk. You hesitate to speak up in conversations because you assume you'll say something wrong. You avoid trying new things because failure feels unbearable. You struggle to ask for accommodations, fearing people will think you're making excuses. You convince yourself that if you don't push yourself to exhaustion, you're not doing enough. This is why so many neurodivergent people fall into perfectionism and people-pleasing, because deep down, they don't believe they're good enough as they are. The harsh inner critic isn't just an inconvenience, it's a mental health crisis in slow motion. When your inner voice is always telling you you're not good enough, you develop a constant state of hypervigilance. You overanalyze conversations, replay past mistakes, and anticipate the next criticism before it even happens. You start believing that you have to work twice as hard just to be seen as competent. This leads to social anxiety, fearing every interaction will lead to rejection, performance anxiety, feeling paralyzed by the pressure to be perfect, rejection-sensitive dysphoria, RSD, an intense emotional response to perceived criticism or failure. When you spend years feeling like you're failing at things that others seem to handle effortlessly, it chips away at your sense of hope. The resulting depression doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it's feeling emotionally numb or disconnected, struggling to find motivation to do anything, feeling like no matter what you do, it will never be good enough. And because depression feeds off negative self-beliefs, it reinforces the cycle of self-criticism. Many undiagnosed neurodivergents spend years pushing themselves to meet neurotypical standards, masking their struggles and pretending to be fine. But there's a limit to how much the body and mind can take. Eventually, your nervous system shuts down after years of being in survival mode. And the most painful part, even in your burnout, your inner critic tells you that you're just being lazy. At some point, the exhaustion becomes unbearable. You spent years trying to keep up, pushing yourselves to meet neurotypical expectations, masking your struggles, and convincing yourself that if you tried a little harder, everything would just finally click into place. But it never does. Instead, you feel yourself unraveling. Simple tasks become overwhelming. Socializing feels like a performance you can no longer maintain. Your brain and body are screaming for rest, but the inner critic won't let you stop. And then you hit a wall. Maybe it looks like burnout, an all-encompassing fatigue that makes even basic self-care feel impossible. Maybe it looks like emotional shutdown, a numbness where joy and motivation used to be. Maybe it looks like a total collapse, a breaking point where you realize you simply can't keep doing this anymore. You start asking questions you never dared to ask before. Why does everything feel so much harder for me? Why do I seem to experience the world so differently? Why do I feel like I've spent my entire life trying to catch up? And then, one day, something shifts. Maybe it happens when you're scrolling through social media and see a post about ADHD or autism that describes your experience exactly. Maybe a friend suggests, "Hey, have you ever looked into this?" Maybe a therapist or doctor brings it up in conversation. Or maybe after years of struggling, you just start asking yourself, why am I like this? However it happens, the moment you begin to truly see yourself through a neurodivergent lens, everything starts to click. You think back to all the times you struggled and realize it was never because you weren't trying hard enough. You were simply trying to operate in a world that wasn't designed for the way your brain works. And that realization, it's both incredibly validating and deeply overwhelming. For many, the first emotion that comes with this discovery is relief. Finally, you have an answer. You're not broken or defective, just different. And with this knowledge comes the ability to start making changes that actually help. But after relief, another feeling often creeps in: grief. Grief for the missed opportunities, the friendships that fell apart due to misunderstandings, the jobs or school experiences that could have gone differently if you had known how to advocate for your needs. And then there's the anger. Why wasn't this caught sooner? Why did you have to struggle alone for so long? Why did teachers, doctors, or even family members dismiss the signs? For many, the hardest part isn't just accepting that one is neurodivergent. It's trying to come to terms with the years of unnecessary suffering that could have been prevented with earlier support. It's natural to fall into the what-if spiral after an adult's diagnosis of neurodivergence. What if you had known earlier? What if you had been given the right accommodations? What if you had understood your sensory needs and set boundaries before social burnout hit? recognized social misunderstandings early, and prevented them from snowballing into isolation, had access to therapy, coaching, or community support to build executive function skills, advocated for a workspace or school environment that actually supported you. These questions can be deeply painful. It's natural to grieve the years lost to misunderstanding, the relationships that suffered due to unrecognized neurodivergence, and the moments where life might have been easier if you had only known sooner. But while we can't go back and rewrite the past, we can take what we know now and move forward with clarity and self-compassion. Because once the egg cracks, once you see yourself for who you truly are, there's no going back. But that's a good thing. For the first time, you have language for your experience. You're no longer stumbling through life thinking, why am I like this? Now you have an answer. And with that answer comes the power to make choices that align with who you truly are. This is the moment where the real journey truly begins. Not just understanding your neurodivergence, but reframing your entire relationship with yourself. Because the shame you carried, it was never yours to hold. It was placed on you by a world that refused to accommodate you, by people who misunderstood you, by systems that expected you to function in ways that weren't designed for your brain. Now, you get to unlearn that shame and rebuild your life in a way that works for you, not against you. So what does that look like? For many neurodivergent people, the biggest relief after the egg cracks is realizing there are others like me. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are not failing at life. You are simply living in a world that wasn't made for you. And now you're discovering people who get it. People who won't call you lazy for struggling with executive function. People who won't judge you for needing sensory accommodations. People who see you and understand you in a way you've never experienced before. Finding neurodivergent community, whether online or in person, can be one of the most healing steps in this journey. It's where you begin to see that your struggles aren't personal failures, they're shared experiences. And within those shared experiences, you can find validation, acceptance, and belonging. For most of your life, you forced yourself to function in ways that didn't align with your needs. You may have spent years trying to use planners that never worked for your ADHD brain, beating yourself up for struggling with sensory overwhelm, pushing through social exhaustion instead of honoring your limits. Now you get to stop forcing what doesn't work and start exploring what actually does. This might mean trying new accommodations like using speech-to-text software, body doubling, or noise-canceling headphones, implementing assistive tools like ADHD-friendly task managers or sensory-friendly clothing, creating new routines that match your energy cycles, rather than forcing yourself into unsustainable patterns. The key isn't to make yourself more palatable to the neurotypical world. It's to create a life where you can thrive as you are. One of the most radical acts of self-care for a neurodivergent is learning to set and enforce boundaries. For years, you may have pushed yourself into social situations that drained you, said yes when you really wanted to say no, or forced yourself to endure environments that overwhelmed your nervous system. But now, you don't have to prove your worth by suffering. Setting boundaries might look like saying no to social events when you're overstimulated, asking for accommodations at work without guilt, protecting your time and energy from people who don't respect your needs, refusing to engage in conversations that invalidate your neurodivergence. You deserve relationships, workplaces, and environments that honor who you are. And if that means saying no more often, that's not selfish, it's survival. This might be the hardest part of it all, learning to stop punishing yourself for simply existing in a way that's different. For so long, you probably believed that your struggles were a moral failing, that if you just tried harder, been more disciplined, or pushed through the exhaustion, you wouldn't have struggled as much as you did. But here's the truth. You were never failing. You were surviving. You did what you had to do to get through a world that wasn't built for you. So what if you procrastinated? Your brain needed a different kind of motivation. So what if you zoned out in conversations? Your sensory system was overloaded. So what if you burned out? You were running at full capacity for years without support. Every choice you made, every coping mechanism you developed, it was all in service of survival. Now you have the opportunity to move beyond survival and into self-acceptance. At the core of this journey is radical self-acceptance. Not acceptance when you fix your executive dysfunction, not acceptance after you prove yourself to others. Acceptance now, as you are, today. Your neurodivergence isn't a problem to be solved, it's an identity to be embraced. And when you stop trying to mold yourself into someone else's version of functional, you can finally start building a life that honors your needs, respects your limits, and celebrates your strengths. Because at the end of the day, you were never broken. You were never failing. You were simply waiting for the moment when you can finally see yourself clearly. And now, that moment is here, and it's yours to claim. If you've had your neurodivergent egg crack moment, know that you're not alone. It's a lot to process, a mix of emotions, validation, grief, relief, and even rage. But it's also the first step toward a more authentic life. If this video resonated with you, I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments. When did you first realize you were neurodivergent? And how did it change your perspective on your life? If you're still in that messy middle stage of figuring things out, you're doing just fine. Self-discovery takes time, and you don't have to have it all figured out right away. If you found this video helpful, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this channel with anyone you think might benefit from it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.